سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد. Respected listeners, today we completed Surah Al-Tawbah and also recited Surah Al-Hud and Surah Yunus. Sorry, not Surah Yunus and then Surah Al-Hud. Yesterday we finished speaking about Surah Al-Anfal, and then we also began, we recited parts of Surah Al-Tawbah yesterday, but I said I'll speak about Surah Al-Tawbah today. Surah Al-Tawbah begins with the words Bara'atun min Allahi wa Rasulihi ila alladhina 'ahadu min al-mushrikeen. There is a declaration of independence from Allah and His Messenger to those whom you have made treaties with from the mushrikeen. Surah Al-Tawbah is also known as Surah Al-Bara'ah. Bara'ah means the first word, which means declaration of independence. And it's rather different from other surahs in the sense that the beginning of, well, famously known, at the beginning of Surah Al-Tawbah, the words Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim are written there. And the ulama have given different explanations for this. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu asked one Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu why this was the case. Now, one thing we have to understand about the revelation of the Quran is that when Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam would reveal verses of the Quran to Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he would also tell him which surah to place those verses in. And when a new surah would be recited, then Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim would also be revealed alongside that to clarify that this was the beginning of a new surah. But when Surah Al-Tawbah was revealed, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wasn't revealed as was customary with the other surahs. However, it's been referred to as a separate surah. So Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu explained to Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu some of the reasons, and such as this, that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wasn't revealed before it, and there's a possibility that Surah Al-Tawbah could have been a part of the surah before it, meaning part of Surah Al-Anfal. And in fact, Surah Al-Tawbah, it would seem that it should have come before Surah Al-Anfal because it has more verses in it. And the structure of the Quran is that at the beginning of the Quran you've got the main surahs, so the surahs that have 100 verses or more, and then followed by the Mathani, then the Tiwal al-Mufassal, the Awsat and Qisar. So this is the structure of the Quran. So you start off with the surahs that have more verses. Surah Al-Tawbah is actually more verses than Surah Al-Anfal. So there's differences of opinion and to study, but suffice to say that there's a possibility that it could be a part of the surah before it, or it could be its own surah. Even if it is its own surah, however, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wasn't revealed before it. If somebody's reciting the Quran, and for example they recited Surah Al-Anfal, would come to an end, they wouldn't say Bismillah before starting Surah Al-Tawbah, they just carry on reciting. Some people believe that you can't say Bismillah on Surah Al-Tawbah. You can if you're starting anew, for example. But if you're reading from before, then you just carry on reciting. Anyway, the surah deals with one, the declarations of independence from the treaties and the annulment of these treaties. Allah also speaks about the Munafiqeen, He speaks about the Battle of Hunayn, and He speaks about the expedition of Tabuk, all in this surah. What happened was, in the 6th year of Hijrah, and we'll speak about this in more detail when we recite the verses of لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ يُبَايِعُونَكَ تَحْتَ الشَّجَرَةِ وَالْبَيْعَةُ رِضْوَانٌ. But here, just as a summary, in the 6th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they marched to Mecca for Umrah, for the purposes of Umrah. And when they reached a place of Hudaybiyah, they were stopped by the Meccans. And the Meccans wouldn't allow them to enter Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ didn't intend to fight. So they prevented the Muslims from entering because remember, they've been weakened by them. Badr, Uhud, Ahzab. No matter how many times they tried, they just couldn't beat the Muslims. The Muslims always would be victorious. So they decided that, you know what, we can't fight against them, but at least let's try and prevent them from entering into Mecca, because if people were to find out that we had let in and we gave up, then it would be embarrassing for us. So they prevented the Muslims, and the Muslims didn't come to fight, so there were some negotiations. At the end of the negotiations, the Sahaba, the Muslims, they accepted many conditions, and again, which were not favourable for the Muslims. And Sayyidina Umar actually asked the Prophet, why do you have to accept these conditions? Aren't you the true Prophet of Allah? Isn't our religion the true religion? Why do you have to accept these? In any case, many treaties were drawn up with the Meccans and some of the neighbouring tribes around Mecca. And what happened is other tribes were able to ally themselves either with the Muslims or the Meccans. So, for example, you had Banu Khuza'ah. They may have not accepted Islam, but they allied themselves with the Muslims. And then you had Banu Bakr, who allied themselves with the Meccans. Now, prior to the 8th year of Hijrah, one night what happened was Banu Bakr and Banu Khuza'ah, they had a feud for a long time ago. And this is one of the reasons why Banu Bakr, when they allied themselves with Mecca, Banu Khuza'ah said, we're not going to ally themselves with the Meccans, they're your allies, we're going to be with the Muslims. Banu Bakr, what they did is they launched a night's attack on Banu Khuza'ah. And the Meccans thought to themselves, well, Muhammad's not here, how's he going to know? So they supplied arms and weapons and helped them launch this attack. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the Prophet about this. So that's when the Prophet began making preparations for battle against the Meccans, because now they had broken the treaty. So this is when the Prophet and the Sahaba began making intentions for the conquest of Mecca to march onto Mecca. And the Prophet, the head of a large army, they marched onto Mecca in the 8th year of Hijrah. And it was at this time when all of these treaties that they'd made, they were brought to an end. Obviously the Meccans, because they had broken them. And the Meccans actually did send, for example, they sent Abu Sufyan, who hadn't accepted Islam until then, they sent him to Medina to try and negotiate. So the Prophet said, look, you know, we're sorry, it shouldn't have happened, but let's keep the treaty going. But the Prophet said, you know, you've broken the treaty. He went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, to all of them. Didn't get nowhere. So the Prophet they marched, and all those treaties were now. The treaty with the Meccans wasn't for a specified time. And at that time, many different types of treaties were drawn. So some were drawn up with a time limit on there, others were open, others were, some tribes didn't have any treaties, but in the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares a declaration of annulment of all of the treaties. And again, none of this was a let's say, breaking of the treaty on behalf of the Muslims. Why? Some of the treaties had already come to an end, expired. Some of them had been broken by the Meccans. So it just transpired that these treaties would come to an end. The Meccans, others would now. So the Prophet they marched to Mecca and they conquered Mecca. And that's a whole story in itself. The Prophet ﷺ, when he entered Makkah, he very magnanimously, with a lot of glory, he entered into Makkah. But he forgave him. Even those people who had hurt him, people like Wahshi, who killed his uncle Hamza, and a lot of people accepted Islam. Many of the leaders of Makkah, they accepted Islam because a lot of them, due to peer pressure, weren't accepting Islam. They knew it was the truth. Even Abu Jahl realized that it was the truth, but he was killed in Badr. But a lot of these leaders knew that Islam was the truth, and they'd seen something, that there is some divine force behind the Makkah, because they'd always been behind the Muslims, because they'd always win these battles. I don't understand how. Even though they were outnumbered so many to one, but they still win. So these Makkahs, they realized that the Muslims were on something, and due to peer pressure, however, they wouldn't accept Islam. But then at the conquest of Makkah, things had changed. And when they saw the attitude of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, a lot of them accepted, Abu Sufyan accepted, and the Prophet ﷺ, again, very forgiving on that day. People like Ikrimah and Abu Jahl, son of Abu Jahl, he Prophet ﷺ, he had fled from Makkah, but his wife accepted Islam, so she came to him. She came to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said, fine, tell him to come back, I won't hurt him. He came back, the Prophet ﷺ gave him a warm welcome. There was Shayba bin Uthman. His father had been killed by the Muslims, his uncles had been killed by the Muslims, and he was hell-bent on killing the Prophet ﷺ. He was really, they were his greatest enemy. And he says himself that I hatched a plan to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, when the Prophet ﷺ was walking after they had marched in, and then he had two Sahaba to either side, and they were protecting him. So then I went from behind, and I rushed from behind to take my sword out and to kill him. And then the Prophet ﷺ called out to me, said, "Oh Shayba, come here." And then he called me, and then he put his hands on my chest, and then he prayed that, "Oh Allah, remove the shaitan from him." And he says, when he removed his hand from my chest, he goes, "The Prophet ﷺ became the most beloved person in my eyes, and I accepted Islam." So the glory and the forgiving nature of the Prophet ﷺ was amazing. It was an amazing spectacle, and we'll talk about that more then. The other Arabs, they would still, however, come to. Now remember, this conquest of Makkah didn't only impact Makkah, even all these surrounding tribes, because they were watching to see what would happen. And when the Muslims marched to Makkah, they realized that, you know what, Islam is here to stay. And that's when Surah Al-Nasr was revealed. Allah says, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, when the help of Allah shall come and the conquest, and you shall see people entering into Islam, into the religion of Allah, afwajan, in their halls, then hymn the praise of your Lord and seek His forgiveness. So even from the neighbouring tribes, so the whole peninsula more or less came under the banner of Islam. However, the Meccans that hadn't accepted Islam, they were still allowed to come and perform their pilgrimage, because the Kaaba was still sacred for them. So even though the idols had been removed, they'd still come and do their pilgrimage. But then in the 9th year, and Allah mentions this here as well, that the Prophet was shutting Ali to make an announcement that from this year onwards, no mushrik shall do Hajj anymore, and no one would do tawaf naked. And Arabs had a funny custom, but they would do tawaf of the Kaaba without any clothes on. So there was an announcement. So all of these are mentioned here. Now, there was a tribe called Banu Thaqif. They were a warring tribe. Now they were led by a man by the name of Malik ibn Auf. Now he thought to himself that, you know what, the Muslims have come to Makkah, where next? So he planned a preemptive strike against the Muslims. And he thought, let us, and they were very strong, they were a warrior tribe. So he began approaching some of the other tribes that hadn't accepted Islam, that look, let's join forces and let's attack the Muslims. So when the Prophet ﷺ heard about this, he gathered some of the Sahaba, left some of them in Makkah and said, look, you stay behind. He left Sayyidina Mu'adh bin Jabal, for example, to teach the new Muslims about Islam. And then they marched up to Hunayn, which is near Taif. So Malik ibn Auf, he was from Taif. So what they did is they gathered at Hunayn, and then there was engagement there in battle. And then when the Muslims began to defeat the non-Muslims, they sought refuge in the fort of Taif, and then the Muslims, they laid siege to Taif as well. In any case, that was another battle that took place, and Allah mentions that here. In that battle, however, Allah does speak about the believers and their attitude, because what happened was there were many Muslims then. Obviously, most of the Arabian Peninsula had fallen under Islam. So many of the Muslims felt that because of their numbers they were going to win. So Allah says, وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ, and remember the day of Hunayn, meaning the battle of Hunayn, إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ, that when your numbers began to make you feel good. But then, because there was a short period during that battle where the Sahaba started to flee the battlefield. And you could only see the Prophet ﷺ, just imagine the prophets of Allah, and a few Sahaba, they were racing towards the enemy. And then the Prophet ﷺ instructed one of the Sahaba, and one make an announcement that I am still on the battlefield. So then the Sahaba, when they heard, they came running back. But then for a small period, a short period of time, the Muslims were struggling. So Allah mentions this, that you thought because of your numbers that you would win. No, it was Allah, everything's from Allah. Allah wants you to win. So that's mentioned here. And the Munafiqun are mentioned here, and there's other things as well. Just one more point I mentioned, the end of Surah Al-Tawbah, where Allah speaks about the expedition of Tabuk. What had happened was there was a rumor that the Ghassanid king, Christian king, that they would march onto Medina, and there were a few other groups that had gathered and they wanted to attack Muslims in Medina. When the Prophet ﷺ heard about this, he had not said to the Sahaba, you know what, we're not going to let them come to Medina, we'll go to them, and we'll march against them. And this became known as the expedition of Tabuk. So the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they marched towards Tabuk. This was one of those expeditions where there was an open announcement made and the Sahaba were asked to join the battle. Whoever was of age should participate. Now, there was Sayyidina Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, famous Sahabi, he says about his story, and the story is made a lot about him and his two companions. So he says that I used to go every day and I think to myself, I'm going to prepare, and he's a procrastinator. I'll carry on, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. And then the time came for the Sahaba radiallahu anhu to leave, and he hadn't prepared. He hadn't got his mats or anything ready. So then he says, you know what, don't worry, let them go, I'll join them. But he didn't even get to join them. And the Prophet and the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, they went to Tabuk, and the reason why it wasn't is known as the expedition of Tabuk, that even though they went for battle, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent some storms and rain, and they didn't actually engage in battle. So the enemy fled, and they didn't actually engage in battle. It was very difficult times, a time of cold and hunger and everything, but they didn't actually engage in battle, and the Sahaba came back victorious without engaging in battle. Now, the Prophet ﷺ asked when he reached one point, he says, what happened to Ka'b ibn Malik? Because I can't see him. And we actually had a register as well, who was here, who wasn't here. So we realized that he had joined. So one of the Sahaba said something, the Prophet was, one of the ones said, don't say this, though, he took part in this battle and that. Anyway, when they came back to Medina, Allah mentions about how all the munafiqun, the hypocrites, they came to the Prophet and started giving excuses. And Allah instructs the Prophet, just listen to their excuses and just let them go. And then Sayyidina Ka'b ibn Malik, it was his turn, he had to come. Now his family was saying to him, look, just make an excuse, you're good at talking. He was very good at talking. So you make an excuse, the Prophet will accept your excuse. It might be, upset for a few days, but he'll forgive you. And Sayyidina Ka'b ibn Malik says, I was thinking, what am I going to say, what excuse am I going to make? And then when he got to the Prophet ﷺ, he told him the truth. He didn't say anything, he told him exactly the truth. So then the Prophet ﷺ said, as for Ka'b, he has spoken the truth. Ka'b, go away, Allah will make a decision on your behalf. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave an instruction that Sayyidina says, and Allah mentions here about how he talks about how the whole world became constrained over him. And nobody was talking to him, and the story goes on about how his cousin brother, once he gave him salam, and he wouldn't even reply to the salam to him. And he says, everything became so difficult for me. And when this first happened, I looked around and all I could see was the only other people that didn't go were hypocrites. But then I found two other people who were Muslim and who didn't also participate, Sayyidina Hilal and Sayyidina Murara. So I was content that at least I had some people with me in trouble. Now, they had to go for this for a good 50 days or so. And then after 50 days, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed their tawbah in the Quran. And then their tawbah was accepted. And then he came to the masjid, and then the Prophet ﷺ gave him the glad tidings that his tawbah. So this is also mentioned here. And this is one of the reasons why the surah has been named Surah Tawbah. We then recite the Surah Hud, Surah Yunus and Surah Hud, both Makkan surahs, very similar. Surah Yunus has the example of the story of Sayyidina Yunus والسلام, and the Surah Hud has the story of Sayyidina, but we'll go for them. There are a few other times when they will come, we will talk about them. Then may Allah bless all of you to understand. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكن من الخاسرين ولا تغفر أحسن في الآخرة أحسن وقنا عذاب النار ثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين اللهم إنا نسألك خير ما سألك نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من شر استعاذ بك نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وأنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله صلى الله عليه وسلم